Bill Masterton collapsed backward on the ice at the Met Center, his bare head cracking against the surface with a sound that made 11,000 fans go silent. Less than 30 hours later, on January 15, 1968, he became the only player in NHL history to die from injuries suffered during a game. His Minnesota North Stars teammates watched helplessly as doctors removed him from life support. The 29-year-old center left behind a wife and 2 young children who would never see their father play again. This is the story of NHL careers that ended in the worst possible ways: tragic accidents, devastating injuries, mental health battles, and personal demons that hockey couldn't fix. These aren't just statistics or highlights. These are human beings whose lives were cut short or forever changed by the sport they loved. Let's start with the on-ice catastrophes that changed hockey forever. Before Masterton's death, helmets were seen as a sign of weakness. Players who wore them after previous injuries were mocked by opponents and even their own teammates. Masterton himself had stopped wearing one despite suffering a severe concussion earlier in his career. When Oakland's Larry Cahan and Ron Harris converged on him that January night, Masterton fell backward with nothing protecting his skull from the unforgiving ice. The impact was so severe that blood immediately pooled on the ice. Teammates described his eyes rolling back as he lost consciousness. He briefly woke up in the ambulance, asked if the team won, then slipped into a coma he would never escape. His death finally forced the NHL to confront its safety problem, though it took another 11 years before helmets became mandatory for new players entering the league. Ace Bailey's career ended even more violently 35 years earlier. On December 12, 1933, Boston's Eddie Shore mistook Bailey for another player who had tripped him. Shore charged from behind and sent Bailey crashing headfirst into the ice. The impact fractured Bailey's skull so severely that doctors gave him less than a 10% chance to survive the night. Bailey did survive, but with permanent brain damage that ended his hockey career at age 30. He never played another game, struggling with headaches and balance issues for the rest of his life. The incident was so shocking that the NHL organized its first All-Star game as a benefit for Bailey's family, establishing a tradition that continues today. Shore was suspended for 16 games, a massive punishment for that era, but it couldn't give Bailey back his career or his health. Howie Morenz met an even more heartbreaking end. The Montreal Canadiens superstar, often called the Babe Ruth of hockey, shattered his leg in 4 places when Chicago's Earl Seibert checked him into the boards on January 28, 1937. The break was so severe that bone fragments pierced through his skin. Morenz was rushed to the hospital where doctors set the leg and expected a long but full recovery. But Morenz fell into deep depression, knowing at age 34 his career was over. Teammates who visited described him as despondent, staring at the ceiling and refusing to eat. 5 weeks after the injury, on March 8th, a blood clot that had formed in his damaged leg broke free and traveled to his heart. He died instantly from a coronary embolism. The Canadiens held his funeral at center ice of the Montreal Forum, where more than 50,000 mourners filed past his casket. Many believed he died of a broken heart as much as a broken leg. Fast forward to March 11, 2000, when Brian Berard's promising career was destroyed in an instant. The former first overall pick was battling for position when Marian Hossa's stick blade caught him directly in the right eye on a follow-through. The impact ruptured Berard's eye, leaving him writhing on the ice in agony as blood poured through his fingers. 7 surgeries over the next year saved the eye itself, but couldn't restore his vision. He lost all depth perception, essential for a defenseman trying to judge incoming forwards and passes. Berard attempted multiple comebacks, even making the 2004 U.S. Olympic team, but he was never the same player. The smooth skating defenseman who was compared to Bobby Orr became tentative and unsure. He retired for good in 2009, saying he was tired of pretending he could see normally. At just 31 years old, a future Hall of Fame career was reduced to what-ifs because of one accidental high stick. Steve Moore's career ended even more brutally. On March 8, 2004, the Colorado rookie was skating up ice when Vancouver's Todd Bertuzzi grabbed him from behind and drove his head into the ice with a sucker punch. Moore lay motionless as a pool of blood spread across the ice. The attack fractured 3 vertebrae in his neck and gave him a severe concussion. He never played professional hockey again. The attack was retaliation for a hit Moore had delivered weeks earlier, but nothing justified Bertuzzi's assault. Moore spent years in rehabilitation, dealing with chronic pain and cognitive issues. A decade-long lawsuit finally settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but no money could give Moore back his career. He was 25 years old with his whole future ahead of him when one moment of violence took it all away. Mark Savard's story shows how repeated head trauma can destroy even the toughest players. After Matt Cook's blindside elbow in 2010 left him with a severe concussion, Savard had tried to return, but suffered another concussion from Matt Hunwick in 2011. The symptoms never went away: crushing headaches, sensitivity to light so severe he couldn't watch TV, memory problems that left him forgetting his children's names. He spent 7 years on injured reserve before finally retiring. In interviews, Savard described living in darkness, both literally and figuratively. He couldn't attend his team's Stanley Cup parade because the noise and lights would trigger debilitating migraines. The playmaker who averaged over a point per game became a prisoner in his own home, another casualty of hockey's concussion epidemic. His career ended at 33, but the effects will last the rest of his life. If you're finding these stories difficult to hear, you're not alone. But they're important reminders of hockey's human cost. Make sure to subscribe if you want to hear more untold stories from NHL history. Paul Kariya exit was perhaps the most calculated. After 6 documented concussions, including a devastating hit from Scott Stevens in the 2003 Stanley Cup Finals that left him unconscious on the ice, Kariya made a choice that few athletes have the courage to make. In 2011, at age 35, he walked away from hockey entirely, saying he wanted to have a functioning brain for the next 50 years. The Hall of Fame forward disappeared from public view, declining interviews and avoiding hockey events. Friends said he struggled with headaches and mood swings, but was determined not to become another cautionary tale. His quiet retirement stood in stark contrast to players who kept coming back until their brains were permanently damaged. Kariya chose his future over his sport, a decision that likely saved his life. The off-ice tragedies are even harder to comprehend. Michel Briere was supposed to be Pittsburgh's future, a 20-year-old rookie who led the Penguins to their first playoff appearance. On May 15, 1970, while driving in rural Quebec, Briere's car skidded off the road and crashed. He fell into a coma that lasted 11 months before his family made the agonizing decision to remove life support. The Penguins retired his number 21, despite Briere playing just one NHL season. His death haunted the franchise for decades. Teammates spoke of his infectious enthusiasm and unlimited potential. In 78 games, he showed flashes of brilliance that suggested he could have been one of the game's all-time greats. Instead, he became hockey's cruelest what-if story. Pelle Lindbergh's death shocked the hockey world even more. The Philadelphia Flyers goaltender had just won the Vezina Trophy as the league's best goalie and seemed destined for a Hall of Fame career. But on November 10, 1985, after a night of drinking with teammates, Lindbergh drove his red Porsche 930 Turbo into a concrete wall at over 80 miles per hour. He was declared brain dead at the scene. The 26-year-old Swedish star left behind a fiancée and shattered teammates who couldn't understand why someone with everything to live for would drive so recklessly. Tests showed his blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit. 2 days later, with his parents flown in from Sweden, doctors removed him from life support. The Flyers retired his number 31 and haven't had a true franchise goaltender since. Tim Horton's death combined tragedy with bitter irony. The Hall of Fame defenseman who co-founded the Tim Hortons coffee empire was driving his Da Tommaso Pantera sports car on the QEW highway after a game in Toronto on February 21, 1974. Police estimated he was traveling at over 100 miles per hour when he lost control, flew off the road, and was ejected from the vehicle. He died instantly at age 44. The autopsy revealed alcohol and amphetamines in his system, the latter likely given to him by team trainers to combat fatigue during the grueling season. Horton had played 1,446 NHL games over 24 seasons, winning 4 Stanley Cups. He left behind a wife and 4 daughters. His name lives on through thousands of coffee shops, but his death serves as a warning about the dangerous combination of exhaustion, substances, and high-speed driving. Bill Barilko's disappearance became hockey's greatest mystery. 4 months after scoring the Stanley Cup-winning overtime goal for Toronto in 1951, the 24-year-old defenseman went on a fishing trip to northern Quebec. His float plane never returned. Search parties scoured the wilderness for weeks but found nothing. Barilko had simply vanished. For 11 years, his fate remained unknown. The Maple Leafs didn't win another Stanley Cup during that entire time, fueling superstitions about a curse. Finally, in 1962, a helicopter pilot discovered the wreckage deep in the Quebec bush. Barilko's remains were still strapped in his seat. The plane had likely run out of fuel or encountered bad weather. The Tragically Hip later immortalized his story in their song 50 Mission Cap, ensuring his legend lives on. Vladimir Konstantinov's story might be the cruelest of all. 6 days after winning the 1997 Stanley Cup with Detroit, the Russian defenseman was celebrating with teammates in a rented limousine. The driver, who had a suspended license and traces of marijuana in his system, crashed into a tree at high speed. Konstantinov suffered traumatic brain injury so severe that doctors initially gave him no chance of recovery. He survived but was left with permanent disabilities. The fierce defenseman who terrified opponents could barely walk or speak. His teammates brought the Stanley Cup to his hospital room the following year after repeating as champions, placing it in his lap as he sat in a wheelchair. At just 30 years old, one of hockey's most dominant players was reduced to learning how to tie his shoes again. The image of him being wheeled onto the ice during championship celebrations remains one of hockey's most heartbreaking moments. Steve Chason died just hours after his Carolina Hurricanes were eliminated from the 1999 playoffs. The veteran defenseman had been drinking at a team party and decided to drive his pickup truck home. He lost control on a curve, the truck rolled, and Chason was ejected. He died instantly, leaving behind a wife and 3 young children. He was 32 years old. Teammates were devastated, especially because Chason had seemed to have everything together. He was a respected leader planning his post-hockey career. But one terrible decision after a night of drowning playoff disappointment cost him everything. His death led to stricter team policies about drinking and driving, though the lessons came too late for his family. The mental health tragedies are perhaps the hardest to process. Derek Boogaard was the NHL's most feared fighter, a 6'8" giant who protected his teammates with his fists. But the constant fighting took a devastating toll. By 2011, he was battling severe depression, anxiety, and addiction to painkillers prescribed for his numerous injuries. On May 13th, while recovering from yet another concussion, Boogaard mixed oxycodone with alcohol. His brother found him dead the next morning. He was just 28 years old. An autopsy revealed Boogaard had advanced chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, caused by repeated blows to the head. His brain showed damage typically seen in men decades older. The enforcer who seemed indestructible on the ice had been slowly dying from the inside. His family donated his brain to research, helping prove the link between fighting and brain damage that the NHL had long denied. Rick Rypien's death sent shockwaves through the hockey world. The undersized forward had battled depression for years while maintaining his reputation as one of the league's toughest fighters. On August 15, 2011, just weeks after signing with his hometown Winnipeg Jets, Rypien's family member found him dead in his Alberta home. He had taken his own life at age 27. What made it worse was that Rypien had been open about his struggles. He had taken a leave of absence to deal with his mental health and seemed to be improving. Teammates described him as the happiest they'd seen him in years. But depression doesn't follow logical patterns. His death, coming just months after Boogaard's, forced the NHL to confront its mental health crisis. Wade Belak's suicide completed a tragic trilogy. The 6'5" enforcer had just retired after 14 NHL seasons and seemed excited about his new career in broadcasting. But on August 31, 2011, police found Belak dead in his Toronto hotel room. He had hanged himself while battling depression that friends say he hid behind his gregarious personality. He was 35 years old with 2 young daughters. 3 enforcers dead in 4 months forced the NHL to examine the role of fighting and the toll it takes on players. Belak had suffered numerous concussions and likely had CTE, though his brain wasn't examined. His death led to new programs for retired players struggling with the transition to life after hockey. But again, the help came too late for his family. Jimmy Hayes represented a new generation lost to a different epidemic. The former Boston Bruins forward was found dead in his home on August 23, 2021, with his wife and 2 young sons sleeping nearby. An autopsy revealed he died from acute intoxication caused by fentanyl and cocaine. He was just 31 years old. Hayes had secretly battled addiction after being prescribed painkillers for hockey injuries. Like so many others, he turned to street drugs when prescriptions ran out, not knowing they were laced with deadly fentanyl. His death highlighted how the opioid crisis had reached even successful athletes who seemed to have perfect lives. His 2-year-old son won't remember his father, another casualty of America's drug epidemic. The chronic injury stories show how hockey breaks down bodies over time. Johan Franzen earned the nickname the Mule for his incredible strength and scoring ability. But after a hit to the head in 2015, he descended into what he calls pitch-black darkness. The post-concussion syndrome left him with crippling headaches, depression so severe he couldn't get out of bed, and memory loss that made him forget his children's names. Despite having 3 years left on his contract, Franzen never played again. In interviews, he's described days where he wanted to die, where the pain was so intense he understood why other players had taken their own lives. He remains on long-term injured reserve, technically an active player, but unable to even watch hockey without triggering symptoms. The power forward who once dominated playoff games can barely function in daily life. Chris Pronger's career ended with a freak accident that revealed years of hidden damage. On November 19, 2011, a high stick caught him in the eye, causing severe trauma. But the real damage was to his brain. The stick had triggered post-concussion syndrome from previous hits, leaving him with vision problems, constant headaches, and sensitivity to light so severe he wore sunglasses indoors. The Hall of Fame defenseman who won the Hart Trophy as league MVP spent 6 years on injured reserve before officially retiring. He couldn't even work in hockey operations initially because being in arenas triggered his symptoms. One of the toughest players in NHL history was reduced to sitting in dark rooms, another victim of hockey's concussion epidemic. Rich Peverley's career ended in the most terrifying way possible. On March 10, 2014, the Dallas Stars forward collapsed on the bench during a game. His heart had stopped. Team doctors used a defibrillator to save his life as players from both teams watched in horror. Peverley was conscious when they wheeled him off on a stretcher, even asking if he could return to finish the game. Doctors discovered he had an irregular heartbeat that could kill him at any moment if he continued playing. At age 31, with years of productive hockey ahead, Peverley had to choose between his career and his life. He chose life, retiring immediately. He later said the decision was easy once he thought about his wife and young daughter. Not every player gets that choice. Nathan Horton's body simply gave out. The power forward who scored the overtime goal to beat Montreal in the 2011 playoffs developed severe degenerative disc disease in his back. By 2014, he couldn't tie his shoes without excruciating pain. He described trying to lift his young children as living hell. Columbus placed him on injured reserve and eventually removed his locker room stall, a clear sign his career was over. Horton spent years trying different treatments, surgeries, and therapies, but nothing worked. The 6'2" forward who once overpowered defensemen couldn't even stand up straight. He officially retired in 2017, but hadn't played since 2014. At just 29 years old, his body was that of someone decades older, worn down by too many hits and too many minutes. The scandal section shows how careers can end in disgrace. Slava Voinov went from Stanley Cup champion to persona non grata in just months. In October 2014, police arrested the Kings defenseman for domestic violence after he allegedly punched and choked his wife, pushing her into a TV that cut her face. The details that emerged during the investigation were horrifying. The NHL suspended him indefinitely while he served 90 days in jail. When he tried to return, immigration issues related to his conviction made it impossible. He fled to Russia rather than face deportation, essentially ending his NHL career at age 24. His name was removed from the Stanley Cup, and the Kings terminated his contract. One night of violence destroyed everything he had worked for. Mike Danton's story reads like a crime novel. In 2004, the 23-year-old Blues forward was arrested for hiring a hitman to kill his former agent and mentor. The plot unraveled when the supposed hitman was actually an undercover FBI agent. Danton pleaded guilty and served 63 months in federal prison. He claimed he acted out of fear and manipulation, but the damage was done. After his release, Danton played in Europe and minor leagues, but never returned to the NHL. The forward who scored 7 goals as a rookie became a cautionary tale about the dangerous relationships that can develop between young players and predatory agents. His NHL career effectively ended the day he tried to have someone murdered. Let me know in the comments which of these stories hit you the hardest. Was it the on-ice tragedies, the mental health battles, or the careers lost to scandal? These aren't just statistics or tragic footnotes in hockey history. Each name represents a person with family, friends, and dreams that were shattered. Bill Masterton's children grew up without their father. Derek Boogaard's family struggles with what they could have done differently. Chris Pronger sits in dark rooms, his Hall of Fame career a distant memory overshadowed by daily pain. The NHL has made changes since many of these tragedies: mandatory helmets, concussion protocols, substance abuse programs, and mental health resources. But every improvement came after someone paid the ultimate price. These 29 players didn't just lose their careers, many lost their lives, their minds, or their futures. Their stories demand that hockey keeps evolving to protect the next generation from similar fates. Hockey will always be a dangerous sport played by warriors who sacrifice their bodies for glory. But no game is worth dying for, no championship worth permanent brain damage, no contract worth losing your family. These players deserved better from the sport they loved. The least we can do is remember their names and learn from their tragedies. If you want more stories from NHL history that you won't find anywhere else, subscribe now. I post new content every few days exploring the untold side of hockey. Until next time, remember that behind every jersey is a human being who deserves to walk away from this game with their health and dignity intact.